V has come too.
Do you remember when Data traveled back to San Francisco in the 1890s and met Mark Twain? Data was also building some sort of device out of technology at the time to communicate to the future. But Data could do that because he's smart. That was in the two-parter episode Time's Arrow.
For the past several months, I've been binging a lot of Star Trek, recently finishing The Next Generation, and getting started on Deep Space Nine and the original series. I always knew about how influential the franchise was, but my only real exposure to it was through the J.J. Abrams movies, which are,
stupid.
Yes.
Like with any popular media franchise, I figured there's bound to be video game adaptations, and of course Star Trek has plenty of them. However, due to the nature and themes of the show, most Star Trek games aren't very action-oriented, and are instead focused on strategy and simulation, which is fine, but not exactly what I wanted. So I began my search into the unknown with a very simple question. Are there any Star Trek shooters? Klingon Honor Guard was released in 1998 for Windows and Mac computers, and it was developed and published by Microprose, a game studio famous for creating strategy and simulation games for the PC, best known for being the original developers behind the Civilization and XCOM franchises. This was the first game that had caught my eye, and for two reasons. Reason one is that the episodes focusing on Worf and the Klingons were some of my favorite in The Next Generation, so I was really excited to see how well it would translate to the game. And secondly, the game is surprisingly a landmark title, as it was not only the first Star Trek shooter, but also by technicality, the first Unreal Engine game ever released, coming out a few months before Unreal itself. The actual software of Honor Guard is a broken mess, and I'm not sure if it's because it's 20-year-old abandonware or if it was always like that. I've probably spent more time fighting against the software than the actual enemies. Constant crashes, constant messing with my video settings, crashing while saving, not recognizing my saves after minor changes, even when the saves are still in the folder, crashing after exiting cutscenes, needing to install some obscure proprietary video codec that barely exists to run the cutscenes, having to remove a black screen that covers up most of the display, and the worst of all, the music doesn't work. Honor Guard takes place during the events of the Klingon Civil War arc, towards the end of TNG Season 4. Instead of following the exact beats of the two episodes that cover the war, the game's story is told through the perspective of a new recruit of the Honor Guard, an organization sworn to protect members of the Klingon High Council, and to destroy anyone that opposes its rule. While none of the main Enterprise crew or Lieutenant Worf shows up, the other primary characters during the conflict do come back to reprise their roles. Robert O'Reilly as the newly inducted Chancellor Gowron, Tony Todd as Captain Kern, and Barbara March and Gwyneth Walsh as Sisters Lursa and B'Etor, respectively. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect from its gameplay. I've played Unreal before, and I've also played Unreal Tournament 99 very extensively, so I had a decent idea as to what was possible with the engine. But I wasn't expecting Honor Guard to feel so similar to Unreal. It's not a complete carbon copy, of course, but there are some very glaring similarities here and there. For example, movement is pretty similar. Both you and enemies can dodge and sidestep. The Disruptor Pistol in Honor Guard has the same functions as the Dispersion Pistol from Unreal, and if that's not enough to convince you, I should also point out that it even does the same flying demo to show off its graphics that Unreal also did, though it's not really as impressive. I thought it seemed really weird why there'd be so many similarities. Sure, it's the same engine, but Deus Ex and Rune are also Unreal Engine 1 games, and they look and feel nothing alike. And then I realized that both studios, Microprose and Epic Games, were based in Maryland at the time, and only an hour drive apart, so it's pretty likely that there were a lot of ideas shared between the two studios. Because of this weird mix of similarities and differences, Honor Guard comes off as a fan mod for Unreal rather than its own separate game, and not exactly in a good way either. There's some really neat ideas here, but there's a lot of bizarre design choices that really show that it was made by amateurs using another game as a crutch. And it feels really harsh to say that, considering that Microprose were full of experienced developers. However, their expertise obviously lied in other genres. Here's some neat ideas. There's a lot of variety in locations for the levels. No one stage feels or looks the same. The very first level has you raiding deep underground into caves full of lava to destroy some energy source which would create an explosion so massive that it would burn down an entire city of rebels. And then right in the middle of it, you immediately discover that it's a holodeck simulation and you're pulled from your training to deal with a real insurgency. You hop around from a ice planet with yetis to dilithium mines, and even partake in a prison riot to kill the warden, and this is only the first few levels. The weapons are based off of FPS staples like pistols and machine guns, and they do a great job of fitting into the world of Star Trek while also being very fun to use. My favorite gun in the game is called the Bach-Hitch, which functions similar to a shotgun, which also packed a lot more of a punch than what I was expecting. The Duktag, a Klingon dagger, is surprisingly a lot of fun to use for two reasons. One, if you throw it right, you get an instant kill, and B, every time you equip it, your character lets out a cheeky, sinister laugh. But what are some of the amateur ideas? Despite having all these different locations that you go to, they're only really interesting to look at, because ultimately every level boils down to the same thing. Shoot some dudes, flip a switch to open a door, shoot some more dudes, and then leave. You might argue that a lot of old school shooters are like that, but those games weren't trying to give you objectives to reach, and also tried to mix things up with interesting level design and enemy variety, which is something that is lacking hard in Honor Guard. You fight goons of different species, but it doesn't really matter, because they're all functionally the same when they decide to not be dumb. Remember how I said the weapons are mostly fun to use? I say mostly because that's only when you have enough ammunition. The dilithium-based weapons burn through ammo shockingly fast, and the game doesn't give you enough to make this not a constant issue. It also doesn't help that, unlike other shooters, enemies don't always drop ammo consistently, and also unlike other shooters, walking over already obtained guns doesn't give you that extra ammo. And then there's the Batleth. Oh man, the Batleth. So, here's what using the Batleth is like in the show. This is what it's like in game.
Did that hurt, little Ferengi?
Out of all the Klingon weapons, this was the one that I was looking forward to using the most in the game. And in reality, it's just kinda clunky to use. It's not that great, really. In retrospect, I probably had my hopes up way too high, and it was probably a dumb idea to hope for combat that was on par with the show, given the limitations, but man, it still kinda stings. Here's an example of how great the design is in this game. The primary objective for Mission 7 is to kill the Warden, who you discover is a traitor in league with the insurgents. To get to him, you have to open a door that's locked by a hand scanner, and you have to kill some goons in the area that'll drop an item that you can use to get past that. However, this item never dropped for me. Since I murdered every dude in the area, I figured that I had no choice but to kill myself and restart the mission. But then I learned that restarting a mission causes you to lose all your weapons and items, so I had to make do with my flimsy pistol and dagger, which is only made worse because enemies don't always drop their weapons after dying, as I said earlier, and after clearing that room, in the next room I had to go and deal with 2 giant Yeti monsters, and these monsters also walk so hard that it causes the ground to shake, which wouldn't be a problem if it didn't also keep me from moving. So, I couldn't finish Klingon Honor Guard. I just couldn't. The few cool ideas in the game are held back by some really awful jank, and not the fun kind either. It's 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and the more I kept playing it, the more of my enthusiasm just started to erode away. It was neither really good or really bad enough to keep me invested and see it through to the end. It was just like really aggressively average. Compared to other licensed titles, I could clearly see that there was an actual attempt to make a good game. It doesn't entirely feel like a cynical cash grab, but it's clear that the team at Microprose didn't fully understand what made first-person shooters of the time really fun to play and popular. In the end, I figured my time was better spent playing, well, better games. Which leads me to the next title.
Welcome to Voyager LCAR's menu system.
Come in, sir. Faster.
They must have gotten them. Not so good for our very first away mission, huh?
In the fall of 1998, the same year Klingon Honor Guard hit stores, Activision signed a 10-year deal with Viacom for exclusive rights to develop games based on the Star Trek property. There were some temporary restrictions on the license. Activision didn't have full access to every entry in the series. Rights to other Star Trek shows and settings were divvied up to other publishers beforehand. Despite this minor setback, Activision quickly got their studios to work right away producing titles. Star Trek Voyager Elite Force was one of those titles, and it was released in 2000 for Windows and Mac computers. Out of all the Trek games ever made, Elite Force stands as one of the most successful and best known, and I'm very happy to say that 18 years later, it still lives up to the praise. The game was developed by Raven Software, who, unlike Microprose, had years of experience with creating excellent first-person shooters with titles like Heretic, Hexen, and Soldier of Fortune. And they had a very close relationship with the most iconic FPS developer of all, id Software. Because of this relationship with id, Elite Force runs on the id Tech 3 engine, better known as the engine that powered Quake 3 Arena, which had came out just the year before. And this fact is proudly displayed on the game's box art, with the outdated and cheesy tagline, "Set phasers to frag." As the title states, Elite Force is based off of Star Trek Voyager, which was currently airing at the time of the game's release. Going into Elite Force, I wasn't nearly as familiar with the show as I was with TNG going into Klingon Honor Guard. The only episodes of Voyager I've seen is this one 2-part episode when the ship gets overtaken by a crew of Hirogen and the crew are forced to partake in some holodeck simulations where they're being hunted, so to speak, by their captors, with one of the simulations being a recreation of Nazi-occupied France, with the crew as the underground resistance and the Hirogen as Nazis and
Are you stronger than these degenerate races? More cunning?
Yes, of course.
And if you were alone without an army supporting you, would you continue the hunt? If your prey were armed instead of defenseless, what then?
Colonel, I don't know what you're trying.
You are superior to no one. Never underestimate your prey or disrespect its abilities. If you do, you will become the hunted.
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird. I don't know. Just like with Klingon Honor Guard, Elite Force has you playing as a new cast of original characters that interact with returning cast members from the show. You take on the role of Ensign Alex Monroe, who can be either male or female depending on your choice, who is a member of the newly formed Hazard Squad, a strike team formed and led by Lieutenant Commander Tuvok to deal with dangerous away missions and to protect the Voyager from outside forces. The story begins in the middle of the USS Voyager's long journey to get back to Federation space. However, after a brief skirmish with the unknown ship, the Voyager is teleported and trapped in what is essentially a ship graveyard, badly damaged and unable to move. It's now up to the Hazard team to search the graveyard for supplies to fix the Voyager and for clues on who their captors are and how to escape.
Where are we?
Apparently, here, Captain. Sensors and most of Voyager's primary systems are offline. Until repairs are made, it may be difficult to ascertain exactly where here is.
There are a number of similarities between Honor Guard and Elite Force. They're both made on the hottest competing FPS engines of their time. They both focus more on original characters and storylines rather than being a straight up retelling of existing stories from the show. The first missions of both games are holodeck simulations and many more. Recall when I said a while back that Klingon Honor Guard felt like a fan mod of Unreal? I mention this because Elite Force feels a lot like a fan mod of Quake 3. But unlike Honor Guard, Elite Force does so much more to build off of the game that it's based on. Quake 3 Arena was a multiplayer centric game, and while there was an offline mode for solo players, it was only just for bot matches. This meant that the team at Raven Software had to add features that were necessary for single player games into the engine. Things like support for cutscenes, level scripting, facial animations for the dialogue, etc. Despite the huge undertaking, the end result is a game that feels like it could easily be an episode of the TV show it's based on. Just about every issue I had with Klingon Honor Guard is completely absent from here. The action is fast-paced, exciting, and hectic. The distribution of ammo isn't inconsistent. The weakest weapons are great to use for any situation. Mission objectives are something you actually need to pay attention to and can fail. Enemy variety is on point. Each mission introduces new, interesting quirks and gimmicks to keep you on your toes. It isn't a massive pain to set up, and most importantly, the music actually works in this game. The campaign is around 7 missions and could easily be beaten in about 3 or so hours if you have the focus. But while it has far less missions than Honor Guard, Elite Force does far more to keep you concerned about what happens next. Scenarios in the game hop between taking care of situations on the Voyager itself and beaming down for away missions. And on these away missions, you encounter other groups who have also been affected by the Forge, a giant space station that's trapping the Voyager and other ships in the area. There are the Scavengers, a loose ragtag collective of Klingons, Hirogen, mirror universe humans of the Terran Empire, and other assorted species. There's also the Etherians, the Borg, and finally the Vorsoth, an alien faction that controls the Forge and is using it to build an intergalactic army. Very much like in the shows, the dangerous missions you embark on don't always go as planned, and some even end up fatal. At the end of Mission 3, which had you sneaking through a scavenger ship to retrieve items that could help repair the Voyager, the Borg make a surprise attack as your team is transporting out. The end result is one of your squad mates dying in the firefight and your commanding officer Les Foster being captured by the Borg for assimilation. The following mission sends you into the Borg ship to retrieve the items as your top priority, with rescuing your commander as secondary. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to him in time, and he ends up getting Borgified, leaving me to believe that that was the end for him. However, at the end of the mission, the newly assimilated Les Foster returns, leading the rest of the Borg to kill you and the remaining team. At the end of the boss fight, your former commander begs you to kill him as you're teleporting off. This was a lot to take in because I really wasn't expecting anyone to actually die in this game, let alone get assimilated and beg for death. And those aren't even the only deaths in the game. The characters may be one note, but they hit that note really hard, so I was definitely sad to see a few of them get killed off. Probably the most impressive feature in this game is the virtual Voyager mode. Allegedly created by Lieutenant Barclay himself, here you can explore different decks of the ship, interact with the crew, and partake in holodeck missions. It's obviously not a one-to-one recreation of the ship from the show, but even still, the team at Raven Software did a really good job of nailing the visual look and feel of the interior. If you ever want to take a break from the explosions and murdering in the campaign, I recommend taking a look into this mode. The game does have issues, but they weren't severe enough to keep me from progressing. As I said earlier, the game is really exciting and fast-paced, but sometimes it gets a little too much, especially as I was playing on the challenging mode, which feels like it throws a lot more enemies at you than normal. Some corridors you encounter are pretty tight and narrow and easily get flooded by goons, making it hard to not get ganged up on and to not shoot other teammates. In addition, some of the weapons feel like they don't do enough damage to handle the amount of monsters the game throws at you. I should also mention that there was an expansion pack in PS2 port of the game, but there's not a lot to say about either. The expansion pack doesn't include a new campaign, but rather a few extra holodeck missions and maps for the multiplayer mode. And as for the PS2 port, it's garbage. Don't play it. Don't play it, please. The tremendous success of Elite Force granted it a full-blown sequel in 2003, this time developed by Ritual Entertainment and without the Voyager branding. But the gravy train came to an abrupt end as Activision surprisingly sued Viacom for a breach in their contract. The publisher alleged that Viacom was not producing Star Trek media at the same frequency as when the contract was signed in the late 90s. The box office bombing of Star Trek Nemesis killed any potential for future films, and Enterprise on UPN was already 1 foot towards cancellation just after 2 seasons. Thus, Activision believed that Viacom's negligence not only devalued the franchise as a whole, but more specifically, Activision's Star Trek licensed games, and they won it out after only 5 years. The companies would eventually settle out of court in 2005, with the rights transferring to other publishers. Fast forward many years later, and there hasn't been any other developer to take up the mantle for first-person shooter Trek that Microprose and Raven Software established over 20 years ago. Even worse, the games are abandonware, and unavailable to purchase on popular digital platforms like GOG and Steam, and probably won't be for years to come due to the odd rights situation the series is currently in. As of now, the rights to Trek are split between CBS and Paramount, with the former owning the TV shows and the latter owning the films. But maybe someday we'll get a developer that gives the series the proper FPS adapting that it deserves. The almighty algorithm is a cold and heartless mistress, and I really need the views and subs in order to become a partner, so subscribe, like, share it with people you know, and be sure to click that bell for notifications, because I don't update very often. See you next time.